So your latest study, I've got the proper title here, state-by-state analysis of federal government transfers net of taxes paid. Believe it or not, I think it's one of the most fascinating things I've read in the last year. And I'll just start off. I was in northern Idaho, and there was a wonderful senator, a state senator from northern Idaho, and he said to me, he was talking about how to get the rule of law observed in Idaho. And he said, every year we send a dollar to Washington, and then Washington sends $1.19 back. And every time I try and enforce the Constitution, my constituents say, we'd rather have the 19 cents. Anyway, so you published the study that shows the net transfer relationships, the money going to Washington state by state and the money coming back. So tell us what inspired you to do this, and when you did it, how it, and what the response has been too. I want to know that.
So I was thinking, well, what happens if we have to, go from, 1.8 to $2 trillion in deficit spending to, say, just $900 billion, which is still a substantial, amount of borrowing that would occur. And what kind of shock would that have on states, because every state receives funds from the federal government. And there are lots of different ways that money flow, from procurement, military spending, contracts, to grants, and the really big, as we'll talk about, the really big one is healthcare, Medicaid, Medicare, and related, because if you have health problems and you're disabled, for example, then you're likely living in poverty, and so then flows more money to provide supports for the low income people. And so I just was trying to get a handle on what that looked like across the states, and maybe what strategies the states could use to reduce their exposure if the federal government really had to, tighten its belt.
I think most people don't understand how significantly the local economies have grown dependent on the federal budget over time.
Yeah, and there's tremendous variability across the counties and across the states in that reliance.
Right, right. But it's still very significant. I'll never forget, there used to be a website called Eagle Eye where you could look at the federal transfers into states, and divide it by contracts and everything else. So Franklin Sanders was bemoaning the fact he couldn't get his neighbors to organize with him to bring real change to the county. And I listened to him. I was at dinner and I said, Franklin, they're all getting money from the feds. He said, what are you talking about? And I got him online to look at Eagle Eye and show him all the money that was coming into his county, including the agriculture money that was going to all the farmers and ranchers. And he had no idea.
Yeah.
And that's why I kept saying, look, before you grapple with what you're going to do locally and what can be done locally, you have to map out the money, because essentially over time, everybody's been bought into the central control model.
Yeah, and the people who have been bought might not even think of themselves as being bought. It's just that
Right.
they are reliant on those resources, and so that influences your decision making. What if we could become healthier, and how could what would happen to the budget deficit if we could just go back to what we were in 2010 or earlier?
Right. So I would say, because now healthcare is a greater expense than interest or military.
Yeah, it's the largest one
Right.
overall, and the fastest growing.
Right. So the great poisoning is not only poisoning Americans, it's poisoning our fiscal situation.
Absolutely.